This episode of Muddy River Gems is brought to you by Dot Foods.
I think what it comes down to is the culture and the people.
Our culture here at Dot is like no other. I've never experienced anything like what I've lived with for the last 12 years.
Dot is very diverse.
It is truly a family-owned business, but it is a family inside and out.
You always feel like you matter and you play a big hand in the pot.
There's so many opportunities to make a difference at Dot and really contribute to the success of the organization.
Hi, I'm Mark McDonald with Muddy River Gems, brought to you by Dot Foods. You know, Hannibal is loaded with historic sites, but there's an element to Hannibal's history you may not have thought about. That's coming up. Faye Dant, we're looking at Jim's Journey's building, and it is a striking old building. Tell us about it.
Good. It is old.
Yeah.
It's the oldest operating building in Hannibal.
Is that right?
Circa 1837, built by enslaved people. Not on this location. It was actually a couple blocks up on what they call Dinkler's Alley.
And it was built as a home,
as a
single-family home.
It was a grocery store, it was a factory, and during the Civil War, it was used to store ammunition. So it's had a lot of uses.
Yeah.
Then when they decided to widen the highway, they took it down. They numbered each stone, and they reassembled it here on city property.
Oh, this is city property.
This is city property.
And this is also your project. It's called Jim's Journey.
Jim's Journey, the Huck Finn Freedom Center.
Okay. That's what it is now.
That's what it is now.
How did you arrange to get this put on city property? How did that get done?
Well, the building was here. I believe even the tourist organization used it for a period. When I got it, though, I got it from Marion County Historical Society. They were using it for storage.
Oh.
And I told them I had a better use for it. Well, first of all, I joined the organization. Then I told them I had a better use for it, and they turned it over to us.
So you have, this is a new museum.
10 years old.
10 years old, okay. And you've been working on it. You, and I assume you have a board or
a
number of people who help you, right?
I have a board, and I have a lot of community support and a lot of projects that have been donated, and a lot of people who have donated their time and their money and everything to make this happen.
Okay.
And to keep it going.
Now, we're going to tour this a little bit later, and you're going to tell us more about it. But basically, why did you want to bring Jim's Journey story to people? What about it, captivated you?
I am a Hannibal native, so I grew up with the story of Samuel Clemens. I didn't necessarily like that story, so I had to kind of unlearn that one. And I did that with the help of several authors, including a woman named Dr. Shelley Fisher Fishkin. She is what we call a Twainiac. And what she did was open my eyes to Samuel Clemens, the humanitarian. So I decided to build on that. She also alerted me to the fact that in Samuel Clemens' 2010 autobiography, he admitted or identified a man named Daniel Quarles as the prototype for Jim in Huckleberry Finn.
So actually, Jim was the first time an African American, a slave, had been made into a real human being in fiction, I guess.
Absolutely.
And that also captured your attention.
Absolutely, and Samuel Clemens did that. Even though, and I get a lot of questions about this, what about the N-word? And I say, okay, we gotta leave it. I mean, those were the times.
Yeah.
And he even talks about Aunt Polly, church-going, community-loving Aunt Polly used the N-word. So it was the times, and we got to keep it in.
Okay, let's give credit where credit is due here. You were pointing some things out to me as we were walking around the property. The sign over here, which publicizes your museum, Huck Finn's Freedom Center, Jim's Journey, that didn't come from nowhere, did it?
No, that was donated by Independent Service Company. They were very generous in that. They took an image that I had and blew it up and built a sign for me. And then I had a volunteer install it.
As you enter downtown Hannibal, that's one of the first things you see. So
That's
it's
one of
really,
the first
it's
things
really
you
a
see.
nice spot.
Yes.
Somebody built the sidewalk for you. You couldn't do that yourself, right?
I couldn't do it myself. That was a man named David Bly of David Bly Construction Company. He volunteered the material and everything. And a good friend of mine named Doc, we call him Doc, he's the one that actually built the sidewalk.
Yeah, and we talk about the city and the relationship with you. You lease the space at a very reasonable rate, don't you?
I lease the space, I'm going to tell you, for $1 a year.
Oh, how can you afford that?
The only thing I have to provide is insurance.
Yeah.
So I do that.
Yeah, that's terrific. Let's walk this way, because you wanted to show me this monument. And I think we ought to show it to everybody.
Good.
Why are these bricks important?
Well, you see the sign here. We're going to call it Unseen. And these are 160-year-old bricks created by local enslaved workers here in Marion County, men, women, and children. And they created those bricks on a man's farm. Well, it was actually out in Marion County. And they were donated to me by a woman named Denise Dameron. Her family purchased this property, and in one of the outbuildings they found these bricks, a wall.
And why did she think you'd be interested in these bricks?
Well, she knew that that was had been created by slaves over 100 years ago.
Okay, so I'm assuming they made the bricks on that property, and then
They
they built the wall or whatever they did with it. Huh?
They did, yes. And then
So
I got a grant from Northeast Missouri Community Foundation. They gave me a grant to actually hire a mason to build the structure for us.
Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent. So this is really nice. I mean, and this also, you get a nice look at the building here as well from this side. And this is what you see when you're pulling into town, the first thing you see.
First thing you see, yes.
Okay, well, I suggest we go inside and you take us on a little tour.
We have a plan.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome to Jim's Journey Freedom Center, right?
Jim's Journey, the Huck Finn Freedom Center.
Huck Finn Freedom Center.
Yes.
Okay, as long as we're mentioning Huck Finn,
That's right.
we're making the Twain connection between Twain and the enslaved people, right? And the fact that he was the first author that wrote fiction that actually humanized a slave person.
He did.
And
he did.
we've got, of course, you reflect on that a lot in here. Here's, of course, a sketch of Mark Twain. And just to the left of that, I find it very interesting that you have listed a number of people, all enslaved, who really benefited from you said he was a philanthropist, benefited from him, right?
Absolutely. And in fact, I refer to him as a humanitarian based on some of the things that he did. And most of the things he did was around education and financing people that wanted to excel. I'll say it that way. One of my favorites is a man named T McGuinn.
And you've got him listed right here.
Yes. McGuinn was born in Baltimore and was attending Yale Law School. In fact, he's an 1887 graduate of Yale.
Wow.
And he happened upon Twain at a restaurant he was working at. And he told Twain that he was struggling. So Twain took it upon himself to write a letter to the dean and in fact donated his room and board, to pay monies to pay for his room and board. So Warner was able to graduate at the top of his class. He practiced law in Baltimore, in Kansas City. He became a mentor to Thurgood Marshall, and ultimately, I get to say that Twain did have a hand in school integration.
I'm sure that's true. If he was a mentor to Thurgood Marshall, yeah. Okay, Faye, another man that's listed on that list is Daniel Quarles. Now, we know him as Jim.
We know him as Jim.
But you've done enough research to figure out who his character was based upon, right?
Yes. Samuel Clemens allowed his biography to be published in 2010.
2010.
100 years after his death, he
Oh,
said.
okay. Mm-hmm.
And in that, he identified Daniel Quarles, who he referred to as Uncle Daniel, as the prototype for Jim in Huckleberry Finn.
Mm-hmm.
And Daniel was actually born, we're thinking around 1808, down in Virginia. He was enslaved by Samuel Clemens' uncle's family in Florida, Missouri.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so Samuel Clemens was going back and forth between Hannibal and Florida all the while he was growing up, and he got to know him and got to loving him and got to appreciate his stories.
And he became the character that everybody's
And he became
familiar
the
with.
character that
That's
everybody knows
very
as
interesting.
Jim.
Now, unfortunately, we don't have a photo of him, but we had a sketch, I guess, or somebody at least thought that this would be a good likeness of him. There may have been a sketch at some point that the artist was able to base this off of.
Yes, Barry Mosher. He's actually a wood carver, and he did that image of Jim.
Yeah, interesting, very interesting. Now, other characters seeped into Mark Twain's head from real life, right? And one of them was a character named Injun Joe.
Well, Injun Joe, as a matter of fact, I have a marker over in Douglasville. And on the marker it says, "I am not Injun Joe."
Okay.
And in fact, we lift him up as the entrepreneur and the founder of a little black community over in this particular area.
Okay, Joe Douglas was his name.
Joe
right?
Douglas was his real name, born around 1812, I believe. And worked at the riverfront as a baggage handler, and bought some property in this little area and resold it to formerly enslaved people once the war was over.
I find that very interesting because this would have been the first black community in Hannibal, I guess.
Of
right?
homeowners.
Of homeowners, right.
Yes.
These were former slaves who now were able to scrape enough money to buy one of Joe's properties.
Yes.
And then they built their homes there.
They did it.
Yeah.
Got her done.
Yeah. Well, Faye, you know, one of your relatives was a former slave, and was he a businessman? What did he do after slavery? William Henry Dant.
Ah, okay. All of my ancestors were enslaved. I'm a fifth-generation Missourian, and my great-great-grandfather was enslaved here, and my husband's great-great-grandfather was enslaved here. And again, that's William Henry Dant.
Okay, that's your husband's great-great-grandfather.
My husband's great-great-grandfather.
Okay,
He was
gotcha.
born in 1837. He didn't die, though, until 1939.
Wow.
And so
That's over 100.
Yes, 104.
Wow. Okay.
He lived in, he farmed for a bit once emancipated, and then he ultimately had to move to Hannibal. He moved in with one of his daughters, and he died in her home again in 1939.
Wow.
We,
and then, and one of your great-great-grandpas on the wall, right?
Yes, good. That's
Mr.
James
Walker.
Walker. James Walker was born in Virginia, I believe, and ultimately lived in Lincoln County, down in Eola, Louisiana, Missouri.
Okay.
He married a woman named Ella Jensen, and Ella Jensen she was not enslaved. She was born after slavery. Her mother obviously was, and her mother was in fact, her father was a German immigrant that somehow ended up here in Missouri as well.
Up top there's a photograph of two interesting men. That just kind of shows what the plight of the folks that were down on Main Street in Hannibal was, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I was so fortunate to come across that. That's in the Library of Congress.
Is that right?
And it was a pre-Civil War photograph of two guys taken down on Main Street. The photographer was a man named R Shockley. And at the time, he was going all around the country just photographing slaves. And he happened up on those two guys.
Yeah.
I like to tell that story, and I like to include that because it really gives you a sense of early Hannibal. Hannibal didn't necessarily own up to the slaves that were part of this community and helped to build this community. As a matter of fact, I found one of our 1859 city directories, and it talks about the manufacturers, and it talks about all the hands that they had. Well, those hands were actually slaves that they had leased from throughout the countryside to come and do the, some of the work. They worked in the cigar factory. Yeah. They worked in the, any business here. The infrastructure, they built that. Yeah. So, and the reason I did the bricks, and the reason I like to talk about that, is we talk about not only the struggles and the hurdles, but we talk about the achievements of the African American community and what they contributed.
Yeah, yeah. Also, to tie into that, after slavery, we saw that they started to build homes, because we saw there was a community where they were able to buy property and build their homes. There was also a black business section, wasn't there?
Oh, yes.
And we have a little information on that, so let's walk that way and take a look at that.
Oh, good, good. Well, I have to tell you though, Mark, we had this area that we call the Wedge, and it originated around 1910. But there were lots of businesses there. Obviously, there were taverns and restaurants, and one of the undertakers was there. Barbershops, hairdressers, grocery stores.
Would that be a list of some of those stores right there?
Some of those businesses at the Wedge, and that was probably from about 1910 up through the 80s, when the Wedge was demolished, and they called it urban renewal.
Oh, okay. So do we know what went in there after the Wedge was demolished?
Save-A-Lot is there
now.
the
grocery store. Okay.
Yes, yes. But we do have a monument there to those businesses, and we're pleased that happened. But we were all over town. This was the main business district, but we were down on Main Street, and we had to develop what we call a community within. So that meant we had our own firefighters, we had our own undertakers, we had our own nurses and doctors, and newspapers. We developed that community. In fact, I have here a 1927 color directory. And you'll see some of the businesses, but you'll see also that there were about 400 African Americans in this community of 20,000 back then. And the story I like to tell, when particularly young people, when they look at that directory, you see laborers, and you see the doctors, and you'll see the undertaker. Yeah. They're all neighbors, and so you didn't have to leave your neighborhood to be mentored. You were surrounded by people who had achieved, and so that was the reality back then.
A very good demonstration. Yeah, yeah.
In Douglasville, that was where we had our first colored school and our first black church, and obviously there were a lot of businesses there.
And Douglasville, again, to remind people, that was named after the man who was known as Injun Joe in fiction, right?
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Really, his name was Joe Douglas, and he was quite the entrepreneur as far as we're concerned.
We'll be back with more of Jim's journey right after this.
From our trucks to their lunch trays, to your local hospital, to your favorite pub, and to your kitchen table. For more than 60 years, Dot Foods and Dot Transportation have been stocking the shelves of your hometown. Sure, we've grown a lot, but at our core, we're still small-town, family-run businesses that care about our communities and the people who keep us running. Join the Dot family today and be part of something bigger.
Why work at Dot?
You could list out individual qualities forever.
There's a lot of opportunities. They take care of the employees, they take care of the community.
So our pay, our benefits, it's competitive. Time off, tons of flexibility.
They're willing to work with you to help you advance.
Faye, between slavery, the end of slavery, and the desegregation of schools in, I think it was 1959 or in the late 50s, there was a long period of time where the black communities had to build their own schools. And in the case of Hannibal, the main high school was called Douglas High School after Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist. And all these communities that we see listed here sent their kids to Hannibal to go to high school.
If they wanted to go to high school. The state had mandated that if you had at least 20 kids, black kids, in a community, you had to have an elementary school, grades 1 through 4, but you didn't have to go beyond that. So if people wanted kids, black kids, families, and they saw education as the way up, the only way up and out, so they had to come to Douglas to continue that education.
Good picture of Douglas right up there at the top. It was a sizable school, looks like it was well built, and actually it was a very successful school, wasn't it? Because the kids got a good education there, didn't they?
Absolutely, and we raised our own teachers, sort of. What happened was many of the teachers had graduated from Douglas, gone off to Lincoln, came back and taught our children as as our need was tremendous need, you know that. So they did that, and we were able to graduate at least 600 or 700 kids in those 88 years.
This is a trophy case from Douglas High School, and of course you're lucky to have some photographs of some of the athletes and the grades, and you've got all kinds of knickknacks here and mementos to remember not only Douglas High School kids but kids from all over the area. It's really interesting.
Absolutely, and we had everything. We had brownies, Girl Scouts, patrol boys, basketball, football, a band, of course. As a matter of fact, the father of Missouri school bands was a man named Martin Lewis, and he was one of the professors, as well as one of the principals at Douglas.
Very interesting. Now I have to tell our audience, I kind of barged in on you before you got all of your exhibits put up, and it kind of looks like things are jumbled around. But we have to apologize because you invited us in before you were ready to open this year, and I want to thank you for that.
All right, good. And we got a generous donation to help us do some redesign of the museum. We've been here now 10 years, and it's time we did that. So we're very fortunate to have gotten that grant, and very fortunate to be at a place where we can redo some things. We do have a website though, and it's been up for a while. Okay, well we'll try to drive people to that website. Can you tell us what the URL is right off the top of your head? Oh, good. I'm sorry. We're at jimsjourney.org. Jimsjourney.org. Okay. Thank you, Faye. Good. Thank you. I appreciate you coming. Jim's Journey, Huck Finn Freedom Center, is open throughout the summer, Friday through Sunday, or you can call ahead for a private tour. With another Muddy River gem, brought to you by Dot Foods, I'm Mark McDonald.
This episode of Muddy River Gems was brought to you by Dot Foods.